A night when the boundary between the living and the dead grows thin, and the ordinary world drifts into shadow. Streets fill with figures in disguise, laughter echoing under the glow of porch lights. Yet behind these playful masks lies an older, deeper story, one born from fire, fear, and faith. Long before it became a celebration of candy and mischief, Halloween rose from the embers of an ancient Celtic festival known as Samhain. For the people of those mist-covered islands, Samhain marked the end of the harvest and the closing of the light. As October surrendered to November, the days shortened, the nights deepened, and the world seemed to hold its breath, suspended between life and death. In that stillness, the Celts believed the veil between worlds grew thin, allowing spirits to wander freely among the living. The dead, the divine, and the dreadful all shared the same moonlit air. To face this fragile hour, villages lit towering bonfires on their hilltops, flames that signaled both protection and invitation. The fire's light was said to guide the kindly souls home and to keep darker things at bay. The bonfires were only the beginning. To confuse malevolent spirits, people cloaked themselves in animal hides or grotesque masks, blending with the beings they feared. Disguised as creatures of the otherworld, they could move unnoticed through the night, hidden from vengeful eyes. On thresholds and window sills, small offerings of food and drink were placed, gestures to appease wandering spirits or weary ancestors seeking warmth. Better, they thought, to feed the unseen than to provoke its wrath. Among the entities honored that night were the Aos She, the ancient spirits and fairies of Celtic lore. Far from the gentle sprites of later tales, these were powerful, unpredictable forces, guardians of hidden realms, keepers of sacred knowledge, and tricksters capable of leading mortals astray. On Samhain, the Aos She demanded respect. Families left gifts to appease them, and children were warned to stay close, lest they be spirited away into that mysterious world beyond the mist. Overseeing these rites were the Druids, the learned priests of Celtic society. By the glow of the great fires, they read omens in the curling smoke, whispering prayers to their gods and performing sacred rituals to foresee the year ahead. Would winter bring abundance or hunger? Would peace hold or would war return? The answers, they believed, glimmered in the embers. Samhain was not only a night of ritual, but a night of stories, tales spoken by firelight of restless spirits who slipped through the veil, of monsters that prowled the forests, and of ghosts who returned not in love, but in vengeance. For the Celts, the otherworld was not a distant paradise or hell, but a mirror of their own, a reflection filled with danger, deceit, and mystery. As shadows danced across stone walls, families kept vigil through the long, cold night, honoring their dead, guarding against unseen forces, and awaiting the dawn that would mark the turning of another cycle. Samhain stood as a doorway between what was and what would be, between memory and prophecy. But this Celtic night of fire and fear would not remain untouched. In time, a new power arrived, the Romans, bringing their legions, their laws, and their gods. Like all conquerors, they absorbed the sacred customs of the lands they claimed, reshaping them in their own image. To the Romans, the Celtic fires and rituals of Samhain held echoes of their own autumn festivals. They saw reflections of their goddess Pomona, the spirit of orchards and abundance, whose harvest feasts celebrated the balance between life's ripeness and its inevitable decay. Apples sacred to Pomona soon slipped into the Samhain rites. In time, they became tools of divination, symbols of fate and love. To bite into one without using your hands, it was said, might reveal a vision of the future. A lover's face, a fortune to come, a destiny still veiled by time. Another Roman observance, Feralia, honored the restless spirits of the dead. Offerings and prayers were made to comfort wandering souls, echoing the same reverence found in Celtic custom. When these two worlds met, their beliefs entwined, the Roman fear of forgotten ghosts blending with the Celtic awe of ancestral spirits. From this union grew a woven festival, a celebration both of harvest and haunting. It was a season of duality, the joy of life's abundance and the quiet dread of death's return. The old Celtic fire was now tinged with Roman order, yet the heart of Samhain endured, a night still alive with whispers, still haunted by the unseen. Over centuries, the festival evolved, its ancient gods reshaped, its rituals adapted. Bonfires continued to blaze against the chill, and the people still wore disguises to mask themselves from whatever lingered in the darkness. Even as new faiths and new rulers rose, the old fears persisted. They simply wore new faces. The Romans brought their sense of discipline, their temples, their calendars, yet the Celts understood something deeper. That there are forces older than law, older even than empire. Some things cannot be tamed, And so, the firelit nights of Samhain continued to flicker through time, passing from tribe to tribe, belief to belief, a celebration of many masks. It became a gathering of spirits, of harvest, of gods both new and ancient. A night that grew ever more potent with every retelling, every ritual, every breath of those who still felt the veil tremble when autumn's wind began to rise. The world had changed, but the whisper of Samhain endured, its embers glowing beneath centuries of conquest and conversion. And soon, as history turned its next page, those ancient fires would meet another power, not of empire this time, but of faith. A new voice was coming, one that would seek to sanctify the old world, to bend its wildness into prayer. The old fears never disappeared, they simply wore new faces. The Romans brought their sense of order, but the Celts knew that some forces could never be tamed. And so, Samhain, now tinged with Roman myth and ritual, continued to evolve. It retained its eerie overtones, its whispers to the dead, and its glances into the other world. It became a celebration of many masks, a union of harvest, of spirits, of gods both new and old. A night that grew ever more potent, a gathering of traditions that spoke not just to the living, but to those who walked just beyond the light. Now, the stage was set for these blended beliefs to take yet another turn, to bend to new masters, and to survive in ways both familiar and strange. When the Christian church set its sights on the British Isles, it saw not only a land of tribes and kings, but also a realm rich with ancient customs, a place where the old gods still walked. The church knew that to conquer the spirit of a people, one must also conquer their festivals. And so began the Christianization of Samhain. The church, ever shrewd, sought not to erase Samhain, but to subsume it. In the 7th century, Pope Boniface IV introduced All Saints' Day, a feast to honor the holy martyrs and saints. Originally celebrated in May, it was later moved to November 1st, a date that aligned perfectly with Samhain. It was a calculated move to redirect the devotion of the people from spirits and fairies to saints and the blessed dead. But it did not end there. To follow All Saints' Day, the church added All Souls' Day on November 2nd, a day to pray for the souls still trapped in purgatory, wandering between this life and the next. In doing so, they transformed a pagan night of thin veils into a Christian observance of the afterlife. Yet the night before these holy days remained untamed, All Hallows' Eve. The church's intent was clear: to sanctify a time of year thick with pagan ritual, but old beliefs have a way of surviving beneath the cloak of new faith. All Hallows' Eve, later shortened to Halloween, became a strange hybrid, a night that retained its ancient roots. Bonfires still flickered on hillsides, candles still burned to guide lost souls home, and children still roamed the night in disguise, now cloaked as saints or devils rather than spirits or fairies. It was a night of dualities, where reverence for the holy dead brushed shoulders with the lingering dread of what else might be wandering in the dark. For while the saints and martyrs were invoked with solemn prayers, the people knew that the unseen forces of the world did not simply vanish. Witches, demons, and spirits of the wild still lurked, woven into the fabric of these new celebrations. The church's holy days had not erased the fear, they had only given it new shapes and names. In medieval Europe, this dual nature flourished. The faithful lit candles in cathedrals for lost souls, while outside, fires still roared against the black of night, warding off things older and darker than any Christian prayer could name. People spoke of saints, but also whispered of witches. They honored the blessed dead, but feared the damned. They believed in heaven, but kept a wary eye on hell. As the medieval nights grew colder and the fields lay bare, Halloween took on a life of its own, a night that was neither fully sacred nor fully profane. The lines blurred between the living and the dead, between the faithful and the forsaken. This was the time when the traditions of All Hallows' Eve began to merge with the folk customs of the common people, creating something altogether new and strange. One such tradition was souling. It took root in the medieval countryside on the eve of All Saints and All Souls' Days. The poor would wander from door to door, offering prayers for the souls of the dead in exchange for small cakes known as soul cakes. Each cake consumed represented a soul freed from purgatory, lifted higher toward the heavens. The custom may have had the church's blessing, but it carried with it echoes of the older ways, the same offerings once left for restless spirits, now given a new, more palatable form. In this mingling of food and faith, one can still hear the whispers of a past where the dead were fed to keep their peace. From this souling grew another custom, guising. Here, children and sometimes adults cloaked in crude costumes and masked faces roamed the night. They dressed as saints, angels, or, for the more mischievous, as demons. Disguised from the gaze of spirits or perhaps mimicking them, they visited homes reciting verses or singing songs in exchange for food, ale, or coins. The guise, a simple mask or costume, served both to entertain and to protect, a nod to the belief that in becoming something other than oneself, one might escape the notice of darker things. One might evade the wandering souls or the evil eye, but there were other things to fear on these nights. Creatures that crept through medieval minds and folklore began to take on lives of their own. Witches thought to convene under the moon's light, casting spells and conjuring spirits were said to be at the height of their power. The tales warned of their malevolent craft, their ability to summon storms, to blight a neighbor's field with a curse, or to whisper hexes that withered crops and soured milk. And then there were the ghosts, souls who had not found rest, who returned to haunt the places of their lives, or worse, to seek vengeance on the living. There were banshees whose keening cries foretold death, and spectral black dogs that prowled lonely roads at night, said to be omens of doom. These beings were not mere stories to frighten children. They were woven into the fabric of medieval life, both feared and respected. People left offerings at crossroads for the restless dead, or placed iron above their doorways to ward off witches. They carried charms, recited prayers, and drew symbols to keep the evil at bay. The church might offer comfort for the soul, but it could not always protect against what walked in the dark. And then there were the divinations, rituals meant to peer through the veil, to catch a glimpse of what fate had spun. On Halloween, young maidens might peel an apple in one long, unbroken strip, tossing it over their shoulder to see if it would form the initial of a future lover. Others might stand before a mirror in a darkened room lit only by candlelight, hoping to see the face of their true love, or perhaps a specter of death. Hazelnuts were thrown into fires, each one representing a possible suitor. If a nut burned bright and steady, love would flourish, but if it popped or cracked, the romance was doomed. And so Halloween became a liminal space, neither fully Christian nor entirely pagan. It was a night where the sacred and the profane danced side by side. Holy hymns were sung, even as ghost stories were told by the hearth. The dead were honored with prayers and feared with superstitions. It was a night to remember the faithful departed and to keep the shadows at bay. As the winds of time continued to turn, this night of saints and spirits would soon make its way to a new world, carrying with it the weight of both reverence and fear, ready to evolve once more in the land across the sea. Soft, distant music, the sound of waves and ship bells, in the 19th century, the shores of America welcomed waves of Irish and Scottish immigrants. And with them came the ancient traditions of Samhain and All Hallows' Eve. The old world's spirits, myths, and customs found fertile ground in the new, and like seeds scattered in foreign soil, they began to grow in unexpected ways. In the bustling streets of New York, Boston, and beyond, the customs of the Celts took root and began to change. What was once a night of solemn remembrance and spiritual reverence began to transform under the glow of a different sky. Halloween in America became less about the souls of the dead and more about the living. It became a night for community, for revelry, for play, and sometimes for mischief. Gone were the medieval fears of vengeful spirits and wandering dead, replaced by a more playful, yet still shadowed night. The immigrants brought with them the practices of souling and guising, which slowly evolved. Children, masked in whatever scraps and costumes they could find, took to the streets, singing songs, reciting verses, and seeking not prayers but treats. It was a custom that would one day give rise to the iconic call, trick or treat. But here, in these early American years, it was still a delicate dance between the old customs and the new land's possibilities. The hearths of America warmed to new traditions as well. Fortune-telling games were played by the fire's light, echoing the rituals of the old country. Apples and mirrors once again became tools of divination. Would a peel reveal the initial of a future love? Would a dimly lit looking glass show the face of a future bride or groom? These rituals, half spoken in jest and half in earnest, kept alive the threads of the past, even as the future of Halloween took shape. Ghost stories, too, found a new home in America. The dark tales that once whispered through the stone villages of Europe now haunted the parlors and porches of New England. But the spirits changed. New phantoms rose to join the old. There were headless horsemen galloping through mist-shrouded forests, ghostly ships that sailed off the coasts of Maine, and restless wanderers born of colonial fears and frontier isolation. Halloween in the New World became a night of storytelling, of candlelight flickering on anxious faces as tales of dread passed from lip to lip. It was a night where memory, myth, and imagination met, where the old world's shadows mingled with the new. With the burgeoning folklore of the new world came something else, mischief. With fewer ties to the sacred and more to the secular, Halloween became an evening where tricks walked hand in hand with treats. Houses might be pelted with eggs, or a gate might mysteriously vanish from its hinges, only to be found atop a barn the next day. Mischief Night, as it came to be known, became an outlet, a way for the younger generation to dance on the edge of rebellion in a world that often demanded obedience. Thus, in America, Halloween found a new life. It was still filled with whispers from the old world, yet it was evolving, turning towards something more communal, more festive, and perhaps a little more wild. From the hearths of immigrants to the streets of bustling cities, Halloween transformed, setting the stage for what it would soon become: a uniquely American night of merry reflection and a dash of fright. The shadows of Samhain had crossed the ocean and found a new home, ready once again to blend and evolve. As Halloween settled into American soil, the night began to change once more. By the early 20th century, Mischief Night had gained a reputation, an evening where pranks ran wild and the spirit of chaos reigned. Tricksters, young and old, took to the streets with devilish glee, soaping windows, overturning outhouses, and filling the night with a sense of unpredictable danger. The thin boundary between harmless fun and true havoc often snapped, and what began as playful mischief sometimes spiraled into acts that brought real harm and fear. Communities grew weary of this dance with disorder. The Great Depression only added fuel to the fire. Youngsters, frustrated and restless, turned Halloween night into a stage for their discontent. What was once a festive evening of pranks could quickly become a night of vandalism, and soon, the tricks began to outweigh the treats. Some towns even considered banning Halloween altogether, fearing it had become more of a threat than a celebration. A shift began. The air grew tense, not with ghosts and goblins, but with a desire to reclaim the night. Parents, teachers, and community leaders saw an opportunity to transform Halloween from a night of reckless abandon into something safer, something more structured. Organizations like the Boy Scouts stepped in, offering alternatives to mischief with parades and community parties. Schools hosted costume contests and pumpkin carving events, giving children a place to channel their energy into creativity rather than chaos. The idea was simple: tame the darkness by filling the night with light and laughter. Across America, towns began organizing haunted houses, where the thrill of a scare could be contained within walls. There was bobbing for apples, ghost story circles, and even Halloween carnivals, where tricks were replaced with games and the treats became the main attraction. Trick-or-treating, once a quaint custom practiced in small pockets of the country, began to spread, offering children a structured way to roam the night in search of candy rather than trouble. It was during these years that Halloween began to take the shape we recognize today, a night not of devils and danger, but of families and festivity. What had once been a wild and unpredictable mischief night was slowly transformed into an evening where children dressed as pirates and princesses, witches and superheroes, knocking on doors with an open hand and a hopeful smile. Halloween shed its darker skin once more, emerging as a night of organized joy rather than unrestrained mayhem. Yet beneath the costumes and the candy, the old spirits still lingered, faint echoes of the bonfires, the veils, and the wandering souls of Samhain. Halloween's heart, after all, still beat with both sweetness and shadows. The transformation was nearly complete, setting the stage for Halloween to grow into the beloved, family-friendly celebration that would captivate generations to come. But with the reins of Halloween pulled tighter and mischief turned to mirth, a new tradition began to rise from the shadows of the old, one that would redefine the night and become its beating heart. In the 1930s and 1940s, the call of trick or treat began to echo through the streets of America. It was a simple yet ingenious idea, a way to manage the wild pranks of Mischief Night by offering children a sweeter incentive. Rather than risk tricks, households could buy peace with a handful of candy. And so a ritual was born, one wrapped in sugar and mischief. Trick or treat became the playful chant echoing through American neighborhoods. It carried within it a promise and a threat, a mischievous bargain between innocence and chaos. Behind every painted mask, beneath every paper ghost costume, was a child ready to claim their reward: a handful of sweets, a brief victory in the age-old game between light and shadow. For one enchanted evening each year, the streets belonged to the children. They transformed into monsters and witches, skeletons and spirits, pirates and heroes. Their laughter rose into the crisp autumn night like a chorus of living echoes. Porch lights glowed like beacons, signaling which homes would honor the ancient pact, offer candy to appease the spirits, or face a harmless trick. The air smelled of caramel and fallen leaves. The scrape of plastic masks and the rustle of costumes filled the neighborhoods with movement and joy. This was no longer the night of solemn prayers and flickering candles for the dead. This was Halloween reborn, a celebration of imagination, community, and just a touch of mayhem. As America emerged from the long shadow of World War II, the country craved unity, small joys that could knit together communities frayed by years of hardship. Halloween, with its laughter and lanterns, became that thread. In the newborn suburban sprawl, the rows of tidy homes, the freshly paved streets, the glowing porch lights, Halloween found the perfect stage. Children wandered freely between houses, their footsteps crunching over the amber leaves, their pillowcases growing heavier with every stop. Parents watched from the sidewalks, smiling beneath the glow of street lamps, comforted by the sight of innocence returned to the night. By the 1950s, Halloween had become a pillar of suburban life, as American as baseball or backyard barbecues. It was no longer simply a night of fear or remembrance, it was a night of belonging. A festival that united neighborhoods and families in shared joy. The old ghosts still whispered in the background, but their voices were softened beneath the laughter of children and the crackle of candy wrappers. Yet even as the spirit of community grew, another force stirred, one with a keen sense for opportunity. The candy industry, ever watchful, recognized the potential hidden beneath this playful tradition. Where once children were given homemade cookies, slices of cake, or apples wrapped in paper, companies began to fill the shelves with brightly wrapped, bite-sized treasures. Chocolate bars, candy corn, bubble gum, these became the new offerings to appease the night. And so Halloween began its next transformation. Candy makers launched clever campaigns, urging families to treat, not trick. Newspapers printed cheerful ads, showing smiling children with overflowing buckets of sweets. Companies realized that Halloween could be more than a night of fun, it could be a season of sales. Soon, October wasn't just about costumes and pumpkins. It became a marketplace of delight, where candy was the currency of happiness, and every wrapper glimmered like gold beneath the porch lights. As the candy bowls filled, Halloween's image softened even further. The wild edge of mischief was dulled by the sweetness of sugar, yet beneath the laughter and the glow, something ancient remained. The exchange between trick and treat still held a whisper of its old power, a tiny echo of the ancient offerings once made to restless spirits on windswept hills. By the mid-20th century, Halloween had become a carefully balanced blend of the sacred and the commercial, the eerie and the innocent. But just as it had done for centuries, the night continued to evolve. A new storyteller was about to step into the darkness, one with the power to shape dreams and terrors alike. From the flickering glow of the silver screen, Halloween found its new voice. Hollywood, with its endless appetite for fear and fantasy, reached into the holiday's haunted heart and drew forth new legends. The shadows of folklore now danced across theater walls, brought to life by light and imagination. Films began to explore what Halloween meant, not just as a celebration, but as a feeling. The thrill of being scared safely, the tension between innocence and evil, the beauty of a single candle burning in the dark. In 1978, that flicker became a blaze. The film Halloween burst onto the scene, turning quiet suburban streets into hunting grounds where masked figures stalked the shadows. The monster was no longer hidden in the forest or whispered about in village tales, it now lived next door. From that moment on, Halloween and horror became inseparable. The night of costumes and candy was forever entwined with fear, cinematic, personal, and thrillingly human. Television joined the celebration, weaving its own spells. Families gathered around their screens for gentle classics like It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, where innocence met nostalgia. But just as often, the airwaves carried darker tales, haunted houses, ghostly visitors, and chilling mysteries that left viewers glancing over their shoulders. Shows like The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits transformed Halloween from a single night into a season of suspense. The glowing screens became new hearths, and the stories they told were the new campfire tales, shared, retold, and passed down through generations. Through the lens of film and television, Halloween grew beyond the doorstep and the candy bag. It became a shared experience, a cultural mirror reflecting our deepest fascinations, with death, with transformation, with the thrill of fear safely contained. The monsters of folklore found new forms. Vampires and werewolves gave way to masked killers and cursed videotapes, each a reflection of its era's anxieties. Halloween was no longer just a night of revelry or remembrance. It had become an idea, a living myth that adapted with every generation, every screen, every shadow that flickered in the dark. And as the century turned, the line between reality and imagination blurred even more. The porch lights, the pumpkins, the masks all became symbols of something timeless. Because whether we gather around a fire, a television, or a glowing phone screen, the story of Halloween is the same. A dance between the living and the dead, between fear and delight, and between the darkness we flee and the darkness we secretly long to touch. Invention met imagination, and together they awakened something ancient. Hollywood and television, with their dazzling lights and haunting shadows, tapped into the oldest corners of the human spirit. The glowing face of Halloween, the jack-o'-lantern, emerged as its brightest symbol. Grinning wide with that wicked, toothy smile, it was more than decoration. It was a guardian, a storyteller, a bridge between worlds. Its roots reached deep into the misty hills of Ireland, where turnips and gourds were once carved with crude faces to ward off wandering spirits. They called him Stingy Jack, a clever trickster who outwitted the devil himself, only to be denied both heaven and hell. Condemned to wander the earth with a single ember glowing inside his carved lantern, Jack became the ghostly guide of the night. When the Irish brought their tales to America, the humble turnip gave way to the pumpkin, larger, softer, easier to carve, and perfectly suited to the harvest season. The jack-o'-lantern's eerie grin soon became the beating heart of Halloween. Its flickering light was both a warning and a welcome, casting long shadows across porches and paths, an eternal reminder of the line that separates the living from the dead. And then came the ghosts. Pale and translucent, they drifted across movie screens and television sets, no longer confined to whispered stories by the fire. But their roots, too, ran deep, from medieval beliefs in restless souls to the Victorian fascination with seances and spirit photography. Ghosts have always haunted humanity's imagination, mirrors of our own longing and loss. Hollywood gave them new life. With a shimmer of special effects and a touch of drama, they became the stars of the show, spirits that danced between sorrow and spectacle. The monsters followed, vampires, werewolves, and mummies. Creatures once born of European folklore and ancient myths stepped out from the shadows of superstition and onto the silver screen. Each took on new forms, new fears to embody: Dracula's hypnotic gaze, the wolfman's tortured howl, the mummy's slow, shuffling curse. These were not just stories anymore. They were reflections of us, of our fear of the unknown, of death, of ourselves. And then came the witches, once hunted and condemned, now reborn under the glow of the moon and the camera's gaze. Their laughter echoed through pop culture, high and shrill, their cauldrons bubbling over with both menace and magic. Once symbols of danger, they became icons of power, rebellion, and mystery, spellcasters who could frighten or fascinate in equal measure. Haunted houses, too, rose from the mists of imagination into both fiction and reality. The creaking door, the flickering candle, the chill in the air, these became the language of fear. Within those darkened halls, where mechanical ghouls leapt from the shadows and costumed specters howled for effect, visitors found a thrilling paradox: the joy of being scared. A haunted house was no longer just a tale told in whispers. It was a rite of passage, a chance to dance on the edge of fear and laughter before stepping safely back into the light. The media took the old bones of Halloween and dressed them in new flesh. The ancient rites of harvest and remembrance became stories of cinema and spectacle. It was no longer only about appeasing spirits. It was about exploring what it meant to be haunted, to be afraid, to find beauty in the dark. Halloween became a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears and our greatest delights. It was the night where ghosts of the past met the glowing phantoms of modern imagination, where the ancient and the artificial mingled like candlelight and smoke. Each October, the world once more steps into that twilight space between fact and fable, where the air grows cold, the veil grows thin, and even the skeptical feel a shiver that logic cannot explain. From the fiery hilltops of Samhain to the flickering blue light of a television screen, Halloween has always been a story of transformation. It is a celebration that has worn many masks. The sacred, the mischievous, the commercial, the cultural. Each era has shaped it in its image, yet beneath all those layers, something eternal still stirs. Once, it was a time to honor the spirits and guard against the unseen. Then it became a night of playful mischief, a chance to mock the darkness with laughter and light. Now, it is a global festival of imagination, commerce, and creativity, a juggernaut fueled by costumes, candy, and community. But listen closely: beneath the laughter of children and the hum of neon decorations, the ancient echoes still remain. The flicker of a jack-o'-lantern's flame, the whisper of a ghost story told just before midnight. The quiet thrill of wearing a mask and becoming someone or something else. These are not just fragments of folklore. They are proof that Halloween endures because it touches something deep within us, that longing to understand, to connect, to flirt with fear and mystery. It is more than a night of sugar and spectacle. It is a living memory of the oldest human dance, the one between light and darkness, between life and death. So as you carve your pumpkin and step out into the cool autumn air, remember, this night carries the breath of centuries. It has changed and grown, but it has never truly lost its soul. Because Halloween, at its heart, is not about what we see in the shadows, it's about why we still turn to look.